Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class.
There's good news to you, I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
Hey folks, good morning, Sunday morning. This is the Valley Labor Report. We are in double overtime today, taking it easy on a Sunday morning. And we wanted to, we've been doing this for a long time. And when we started this up nearly 3 years ago now, David and I did a kind of introduction to ourselves, and a introduction to the project. But since then, we haven't done that. We haven't done a who is it that's talking to y'all every week. We haven't really done anything like that since then. And that video is really bad. So the audio is really bad. The video is really bad. Definitely, we had never, that was probably the first time that either of us had been, done an extended talk into a camera before. So, not to say we're professionals now by any means, but, I think we're a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera than we were 3 years ago. And we've never done anything like this for Adam, ever. So we wanted to do a little series where we introduce you to the folks making the show. And so we're going to start off with Adam, and then at some point we're going to switch. We're going to have Adam interview me, and then at another point, I think we're going to probably bring David back on for just to interview him and talk to him about his his life, because he has lived a fascinating life. I knew him for years before I realized that he spoke Spanish and had lived and worked in Mexico for like 2 or 3 years, which is a bizarre thing not to know about somebody that you're as close to as David and I. So today we're focusing on Adam. So Adam, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
I appreciate it. It feels a little strange to be on this side of the microphone and camera, but hey, I'm here. Happy to talk.
There you go.
I'm trying to remind myself that this is live, and since we're going to be getting personal, I guess I should be careful.
Yeah. Well, so, we mentioned yesterday that we were going to kind of structure this like, we've taken a lot of inspiration from Max Alvarez and the Working People podcast. And so, it's probably going to be structured something like that. Just kind of, I know that Adam has a lot of fun stories and his journey to being a labor organizer, somebody who's, dedicated to unionism is definitely, definitely worth hearing. And so, we can just start off, Adam, with your, childhood. You grew up in Mississippi. Talk to us about, growing up in Mississippi and your, the school that you went to and the jobs that your parents had, stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, I was born in Meridian, Mississippi. Not to dump on my hometown, but leaves a lot to be desired. I was born in Meridian proper, lived in Meridian until about third grade. We moved out to the country, or to the county. It wasn't very country by then, but that's Lauderdale County in Mississippi. So it's a little bit west of Tuscaloosa, for those of you maybe not so familiar with it. The thing about Meridian is that it peaked with the railroads, and it's kind of been a slow decline since then. All my folks are from that area, on both my mom and dad's side. So grew up there, and I did not move to Alabama until I was 12, the summer right before 7th grade. And, my time in Meridian in Mississippi, I grew up with lots of, I guess, rural roots. Both sides of my family came from the country. My dad grew up on the farm, and I know he was very motivated to leave the farm. And that was, I think, a lot of his inspiration. To go to college, he went to college to be an accountant, right? So he went a totally different direction. He was tired of feeding cows and picking beans, and so he was ready to have an office job. And so he went to Southern Miss. Those of you who know me know I'm a big Southern Miss sports fan, so I've stayed loyal to my team. And my mom, similar in that she grew up in the country, little farm, and I didn't have strong union roots in my background. I have to go back to grandparents and great-grandparents to find folks who were in labor unions. And it wasn't something we really ever talked about either growing up. But, I was pretty glad to get out of Meridian. I'm not going to lie about that. And in retrospect, I'm even more thankful. Like a lot of places, it that has long since peaked. It's seen outsourcing, it's seen deindustrialization. There's not a lot of opportunities there, and so, like I said, around the age of 12 is when my dad decided to pick up, and we moved to Huntsville. He had an opportunity to come up here, and that's what we did, and that was definitely a life-changing experience for me, and set me on a whole different path. One thing that really sticks out from growing up down there is I was raised to be a Southern boy, and all the conservatism that comes with that, and I guess I can just leave it at that for now. But it certainly is unusual that here it is in 2023, and I'm this dedicated unionist and talking union on the radio, and that was not what anyone would have expected, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, so what did your dad end up being an accountant?
Yeah. He did. He actually worked for PV Electronics in Meridian. If there's any musicians listening, they're probably familiar with PV. Got its start there in Meridian. So that's what he did. And so, I had kind of we were on the edge between working class and middle class, and sort of the fluid spectrum that flows between those two. And, we had some struggling years, and then we had some better years. I wouldn't say I grew up in poverty by any means, but, some years were better than others, of course. And, I respect that my father made the decision he made to pick up his family and move 4 hours away. That's a tough call. That's a call that I've looked at myself, now as a father, and it's very difficult. But I've told him since then he made the right decision. It gave me and my brother, new opportunities that we wouldn't have had we stayed, I think, and it exposed us to new types of people that we would have never met otherwise. I remember moving to Huntsville, and one of the earliest things about school in Huntsville that shocked me was there were Asian people. I'd never encountered many Asian people. It was just white folks and black folks, and a handful of Hispanics, and so there was a different type of diversity here in Huntsville, with it being a high-tech city, heavy federal employment, heavy military. So there was a diversity here in Huntsville that I'd never experienced before. And I had kids in my class that were Buddhist and Hindu and Muslim, and so that was very new to me. I was just, kind of blown away by that. Um, and so that, as much as I sometimes can be very tough on Huntsville for not living up to its progressive rhetoric and things like that, I definitely can recognize some of the differences. To include even when it came to race, and the level of racism that, I saw a difference when I moved 4 hours north. Let's put it that way. In the way people talked, and some of the things that people said. It seemed like the farther north we went, the less comfortable certain people were in saying certain things publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something else that certainly stood out to me.
How do you think, were your parents and your family and the people that you grew up around very political, either in Huntsville or Meridian?
No, not at all. Not political. I heard political stuff at home, but definitely never heard, they never went to city council meetings, right? My parents were never that kind of citizen that was, going to government meetings or lobbying legislators or anything like that. It was political in the sense of talking about what they heard on radio and TV, or saw in the papers, that sort of thing. And it was certainly from a conservative perspective. I was raised thinking that Ronald Reagan was apparently the best president in living memory. That was one of the things I was taught, among many other things. And so that definitely is something different, I guess, about me, is that I was very interested in history and politics from a very early age, for whatever reason it was. Like a lot of, I guess, young boys getting interested in war history and things like that. So I was very interested in Civil War history. And like most Southern white boys, I had Confederate flags and was raised with certain ideas and expectations about folks that I'm very grateful that I've broken out of and kind of saw the light. And wrestling with those contradictions helped me to develop politically, I believe.
What do you feel like was your, I can think of, a few light bulb moments for myself, but you grew up in, you're not that much older than me, but it's still, you're older enough than I am that it was a pretty different era when you were kind of coming into adulthood and being politicized. What was your, what were some of your light bulb moments where you started to break with, being like a Confederate flag having type of person, right?
Yeah. Well, I was coming of age during the Bush era, and I think that certainly played a huge role in my development. As I grew into a teenager, like any teenager, you start questioning things that adults have told you in your life. I certainly was a smart-ass, rebellious teenager. I guess I still am in a lot of ways, but that was certainly part of it as well, right? So, I was raised very conservatively, grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and so I thought Bush was supposed to be the good guy, right? And the more I read myself, the more I began to question things. So, beyond just the natural teenage curiosity, I was still very interested in politics and history, like just intellectually curious. And so, I'm thinking around the time I was 15 and especially about 16, I had started just reading all sorts of different materials. and reading authors like George Orwell and Malcolm X even, and folks like that were kind of outside of maybe what I had normally been exposed to. And as that was happening in the background, you have Hurricane Katrina and the Iraq War, and those two in particular, I know very much caused me to ask questions. And it was hard to look at the scenes on TV from Katrina, and certainly the war in Iraq and 9/11, the super patriotism, which we call it super patriotism, but really you had jingoism and some pretty disgusting nationalism happening at the time, and believe it or not, I was an ROTC starting out in high
Wow,
school.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
that Adam was an ROTC. Wow.
Yes, so here I am, this very anti-war, anti-imperialist person, but I was an ROTC the first couple of years of high school, and I would say the war in Iraq and 9/11 shaped all of us of that particular age group and that cohort, because most of us boys thought at some point we might have to go off to war. It was silly in retrospect, but you are kind of silly as a teenager, and but you see this happening on TV and you wonder if you're going to have to get involved as well. But I would say, I started just really asking a lot of questions. I started exposing myself to a lot of different things intellectually, and reading not just conservatives, but liberals and libertarians, and then which leads into anarchists, right? Libertarian socialists, and the next thing you know, you've encountered people like Marx, and so it was. I think it was those combination of things, the teenage rebelliousness, the background of the Bush regime, and just some of the horrors taking place under their administration that became harder and harder to justify. While I was exposing myself to different things intellectually, and the last thing I would say is probably music actually played a role too. I was very into music from the 60s and 70s, and that counterculture era, and that also got me thinking, because Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin would not vote for George W. Bush, right? And so here were my my heroes, so to speak, who had embraced a alternative culture, who were anti-war, who were pro-civil rights. So there again, those sort of contradicted with many of the things I've been raised to believe, and just kind of forced me to think a little bit harder about it, about what did I really believe, and why.
It's interesting that there's a lot of people that are your age on the left, and just so that folks know, you're 32 now.
33.
You're 33 now.
Yeah.
So how old were you when 9/11 happened?
I was in 7th grade. Yeah. So that summer I moved here, summer 2001.
Okay.
And I had been in school for all of like a few weeks when 9/11 happened.
So you were 12 when 9/11 happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting that there are a lot of people your age that are on the left that they cite kind of 9/11 and the Iraq War as a turning point for them, but the jingoism that you mentioned is I understand it, because I was 5. I turned 5. 9/11 is my birthday. I turned 5 when 9/11 happened, right? So I really had no idea. I wasn't,
Right.
But the attitude was like 80-20 in support of the Iraq War, right? And so it's interesting that that there are a lot of people that kind of found themselves in that 20%.
Well, and I would say I was probably like a lot of folks. I was part of the 80% until I wasn't. Right, and by the time we're talking. So by the time I'm 16 or so, 2006, 2007, by the time I'm getting ready to graduate high school, by that point, a lot of folks had woken up to the horrors of the Iraq War, and the ways in which patriotism had been exploited to infringe upon our rights with things like the Patriot Act and the just some of the blatant corruption of the Bush administration, and of course their alliance with evangelical Christianity. So all those things were definitely swirling around, and but yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of people of my particular, this particular segment of millennials were heavily shaped by that, and then as I'm graduating high school and trying to get into college is when the economy collapses, right? And we have the biggest economic collapse since the Great Depression. And I think that also just sort of reaffirmed the things that I had already been growing to learn and growing to feel. That all, to me, it just reaffirmed that the status quo was broken, and that there must be a better alternative.
So when did you graduate college? Was it 2009?
Let's see. I graduated college, I believe, in 2011.
2011. Okay.
Yeah, so the time I'm in college is the time Occupy Wall Street's going on, and that certainly played a role for me politically in the sense that I saw out in the public a questioning of the status quo that had maybe not happened previously. We had big anti-war protests early in the Bush administration, of course, and anti-globalization protests in the late 90s, early 2000s. But Occupy Wall Street was a little different because they were starting to look at the economy as a whole. They started to put forward a class analysis of some kind. 1% versus 99%. Maybe it's a little simplistic now to think of, but at the time, it was just exciting to know that there were people in New York and California and across the country that were willing to demonstrate, and that I wasn't alone, even if I felt pretty alone here in Alabama. I at least knew that there were other folks out there thinking similar things and asking similar questions across the country, even if I didn't know very many of them around here.
The Occupy Wall Street was is another big, I think that probably 9/11, the Iraq War, the recession, and then Occupy Wall Street, and Bernie's 2016 campaign, I think for people that are kind of my age to a little older than you, those are probably four of the biggest, politicization moments for so many.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that.
And so, the big stuff, some of the big stuff for us is, as far as, the way that I think that we see the world and that we see change coming, and the way that we picture people is coming up for you kind of in this story now as you're entering the workforce. I see the workforce and production as a very important part of, how society is and how society is going to change. And so what went into your decision-making process when you decided to be a teacher? Your dad was an accountant. I'm not sure what your mom did, but what made you decide to be a teacher, and what was your experience like going from student teaching to actually having your own classroom, and what did that do for you?
Yeah, I decided when I was in high school that I thought I wanted to be a high school history teacher, maybe eventually teach at the college level. I had this love for history. I wanted to do something to make a difference in the world. As naive as that may sound, that's what I wanted to do. I felt like that's why I was here. And frankly, that's what kept me motivated. My teens through early 20s were pretty difficult for me. Sometimes because of circumstances out of my control, sometimes because of poor choices I made. And people I associated with. But, there was a several-year stretch that was very difficult for me. And this idea I had that I could be a teacher and I could help young people to not only feel better about themselves, but to feel better about themselves and actually know a little bit about history and be able to apply that and to, maybe think critically about the world they live in. And that really, something about that just really intrigued me. I was lucky that I had some good teachers, here in Huntsville. And I wanted to give back. I knew that I didn't want to just go make a profit for for somebody else. And so being a teacher seemed to be a way to do that, a way to connect with the community and give back, a way to use my love of history. And because I was, I was kind of a screw up as a kid that stayed in trouble a lot. I wanted to be there for those kids. The kids that make straight A's, that never get in trouble, that have involved parents, and most of the time they're going to be okay, regardless of what kind of teachers they get. It was the troubled kids. That's what sort of motivated me, and so as I was going through hard times, that kept me from totally falling apart. I think just because in the back of my head, I knew I had to hold it together enough to be able to finally graduate college, to get a teaching certificate. When I did my student teaching, I was out at Decatur High, and I really enjoyed that. I liked that school a lot in the sense that it was very diverse, and I had students coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, and that was really neat to me. And it reaffirmed for me that I was making the right choice, that I felt like I was actually pretty good at something. I had worked all throughout these years when I was in school and everything. I worked in the restaurant industry, and much like you, I had some experiences in the restaurant industry that only reaffirmed some of my political ideas at the time, but also it was tough work, and it wasn't. It didn't hit quite the same as when I was in the classroom and working with young people. There was just something about it, to see a kid's light bulb go off, and know that you force them to think a little differently, or to see them master something, to grasp something. There was just something very fulfilling about that. Mm-hmm. And so the student teaching definitely reaffirmed that, and was hustling to get into the classroom. All this time, I was still kind of having some political development, but really on my own, not with other people. I was not organized in any way, with anybody. And it was still a lot of, coming more from like a theory perspective than a practice perspective. But yeah, teaching, I did land a teaching job in Huntsville, oddly enough, at my alma mater at Grissom, which was a little interesting. As I said, I wasn't the best student or the most well-behaved student, so I ended up right back at my old high school, a place I never thought I'd go back to. But when you're trying to break into teaching, you take whatever teaching job they'll give you, right? When you're fresh out of college, and you do what they ask, and so I went to work. This was 2012. I got hired by Huntsville City Schools, and this was like a year or two deep into Casey Werdinsky's administration. So I had already been following corporate education reform and privatization and kind of understanding these trends and where things were going with public education being under assault, and with public education unions being under attack as well. I already kind of had some background there. And then when I entered into the classroom, I got to experience it firsthand. And that was, that just, motivated me further to get involved.
Did your time in the restaurant industry while you were in college, was that, because I always saw for me that as a very formative experience for the way that I see the world. But I wonder, did it play a similar role for you, or did you see your formation coming from other places?
I don't know that it was so much formative as like, just sort of reaffirmed a lot of what I had felt, about the economy, about like inequality in our country, imbalances of power. A lot of that, that I was already kind of thinking and or reading about. You go to a restaurant and you go to work there and you see a lot of it up front. And I spent time in different roles. I was a shift manager for a while at a couple fast food restaurants, so I even have sympathy for those who are kind of on the lowest rungs of management inside that industry, because I know that they are exploited as well. And they're not necessarily management in the way that we normally talk about it in a labor management relationship. And there were certainly times where, I was taking 1 or 2 classes and working 50, 60 hours a week. And so that, it taught me a few things. I didn't want to be on second shift for the rest of my life. I knew that. Right. Second and third shift was for the birds. Was not a big fan. But I met a lot of interesting people. And that also... that's one of the things that probably stands out the most in terms of my time in the restaurant industry was I met a lot of great people. I met a lot of people who all had really interesting stories, people who were down on hard times, who were trying to catch back up, and people who had spent their whole lives in restaurants, people who had been laid off from other jobs and in some cases more lucrative jobs and kind of ended up in restaurants. A lot of people who were kind of on the margins for various reasons. People struggling with addiction. Met a lot of folks like that.
Do you have any like stories or anecdotes that particularly in your mind kind of exemplify working in the restaurant industry, and then what that reaffirmed for you?
Well, there's no particular anecdote that I'm seeing come to my mind. That what I'm seeing is really just kind of a lot of the faces that I worked with over the years, and how these were people who, worked hard and they were struggling. These were, in some cases, people who were struggling with health issues, with no health insurance. People who were addicted to drugs and were working basically to feed their habit and were on a path to destruction, and you could just see it. People who had 2 or 3 kids at home and nobody to help them. And so I just, seeing folks like that who were struggling so hard, just to, also somebody could have a hamburger and french fries, right? It just didn't feel right to me that in a country with such great wealth, with such great resources, to see so many folks just struggling, folks with so much potential. And that's not to take anything away from working in the restaurant industry, because, obviously there are folks doing great work in that industry, but it's hyper exploited. And, some of the things you would see in the workplace in terms of sexual harassment, abuse from customers, and threats from customers, and safety concerns, even things that maybe seem minor, just your routine burns, your, you catch athlete's foot because your feet are soaked in water every single night because you're scrubbing floors, right? You're twisting your ankle, taking the trash out, those sorts of things. It just really reaffirmed for me how hard so many people were working, and how little progress they were making. And it felt to me like, things could be a lot better.
And so when you moved into teaching, did you did it feel like, okay, this is going to be it, and this is going to be, how I spend the rest of my life, and this is going to be a really great job, and I'm going to have a did you have it built up in your mind as, this is it?
Oh, I had it built up in my mind, yeah. I can't say it lasted very long like that in my mind, because the reality of teaching was a wake-up call. I guess like all young idealistic teachers, you go in thinking you're just going to change the world and you're going to make such a difference, and like you love these kids so much and they're going to know that, right? And they're just going to all do what you say,
Right.
and they're all going to do great on their test, and,
Yeah.
and principal's going to be happy. And of course it's a lot more complicated than that, and so it really depended on the day. You asked me as to whether or not I felt I could keep going. There were many late nights, those years in the classroom, many late nights where I thought, I don't know if I can do this. And then you'd have those moments that would be so powerful and so inspiring that, would give me the juice to keep going for another week or two. And I should mention that my wife is a teacher, and we entered the profession at the same time. We met at Athens State, where we were both going to college to be teachers. So we were on taking that same journey into the classroom at the same time, and I couldn't have made it without her for sure. Wouldn't have made it. But I still thought, even as difficult as it was, that maybe I could really make it work, and if nothing else, keep plugging away, get some tenure, get a little job security, maybe go back to school, and then see if, teaching at the college level would work out. I still maybe had that in the back of my head.
And when you're, while you were doing this, while you were working as a new teacher, how involved were you, or at what point did you become involved with the teachers union, or with the teachers association?
Yeah.
In some states they would call it a union, and not in our state. And we're talking about the Alabama Education Association.
Yeah.
You were involved with them for a very long time as a teacher and then as staff. When and why did you become involved with them?
So, by that point, I felt pretty deeply in my heart that the best way to make change was organizing workers, that an organized working class was how we could build a better world. And not only should we do that, we don't really have much of a choice. That's really our best hope left to address just the multiple layers of crisis that we're living in. So that in mind, I thought, okay, well, I'm a teacher, right? So I need to start with fellow teachers. We are being exploited. We're being oppressed. We are being taken advantage of. We're being asked to do things that we know is against our best judgment. And so we've got to push back. And so I did get pretty quickly involved. I think I signed up to be a building rep by the end of my first year. I was following what was happening in Montgomery, because this time period that I was getting my foot in the door of education just so happened to be the same time period that the Alabama Republican Party had launched an all-out assault on public schools in this state. You had the Great Recession, and following that were some of the steepest budget cuts in the country. Following that, you had this takeover, the 2010 takeover of the Republicans in Montgomery, which meant from 2011, as I was starting to, do my student teaching, those next few years, it was a nonstop assault. You had the legalization of charter schools, the legalization of vouchers through the Accountability Act, attacks on tenure, attacks on the pension system, attacks on AEA, you name it, right? So public schools were under assault. Here at the local level in Huntsville, we were dealing with Casey Rudinsky, who came from the Broad Academy. This is a man literally trained in the arts, the dark arts of corporate education reform and privatization. And so I was feeling it on a personal level that I maybe hadn't before, right? What had been largely theoretical now became my day-to-day existence, and that definitely for me, I felt like I had to fight back. Um, it I can't say it always made me feel better, but I had this crazy notion that like we couldn't lay down and take it. We had to do something. Uh, and so yeah, I signed up to be a building rep. I started asking questions. I started having conversations with folks. So much so that folks started coming to me, um, which was a little different. You know, here are my colleagues who are twice my age, old enough to be, you know, my mom, or in some cases my grandmom, and they're
in
coming
certain
to
cases,
me.
certainly old enough to be your teacher. Some of them probably were your
Some of them
teachers.
were my former teachers. Yeah, yeah, and so that was a little bit of a different experience for me, and kind of forcing me to grow up a little bit. You know, you're not just that kid anymore. You know, folks are starting to come to you, and trust what you have to say, or at least want to know what you have to say. And so yeah, the couple years I was at Grissom, kind of grew into that building rep role. Started attending meetings of the local association. Started, you know, and on my own was doing advocacy stuff in terms of writing legislators and getting involved with the Badass Teachers Association, which was like a grassroots group, you know, that was kind of centered on Facebook, and connecting with other national groups, Network for Public Education, things like that. So, yeah, I think by end of year one, I was already involved. By end of year two, I think I had already ran for delegate to the state and national assemblies, and had won those positions. And then I actually volunteered to go from Grissom to J.O. Johnson on the other side of town, which was a whole different experience. Those of you who aren't local, you know, I went from, you know, the blue ribbon school, quote unquote, with a diverse but white majority school with very high test scores on the more suburban south end of town, and left to go to the north end of town, which is, you know, predominantly African American. The school itself was 95% black, I believe.
Wow.
And probably, you know, just as high in terms of the free and reduced lunch rate. You know, so high poverty, low test scores. It was considered a failing school, quote unquote. So that also, I think, was you know, that was a formative experience for me to see the inequities that were in our system. You know, even within the same city school system, the inequities. Based on, you know, your neighborhood, based on your race, and yeah, that it was good for me culturally. I think it was good for me to see it firsthand, some of those inequities, and to know what some of those teachers were going through. And in some cases, there were things that, you know, it put things in perspective, right? Because when I was at Johnson, we had students. We had so many of our students where, you know, the most important thing for them was whether they made it back the next day, whether they had a full belly, whether the lights stayed on that night, you know. And so when I would think about some of those teachers that come to me and had complained, like, because too many kids were chewing gum in class or something like that, something that in context now seems very minor and petty. You know, we were dealing with a whole new set of problems on top of the same issues that we were dealing with from our central office. But so that was a wake up call as well. Yeah, to teach in a high poverty school. You know, to try to teach AP classes when you have kids that were reading at an elementary reading level in some cases, right? That's how far behind they were. And the expectation, though, was that you were just going to work miracles.
Right.
You know, and that was so frustrating for me and for all of my colleagues, that we felt like we were put in situations where you just couldn't win. But the expectation was that you were gonna win, and you weren't gonna ask for help to do it either, right? You were just gonna figure it out. And somehow these kids who were like 6, 7 years behind academically, you're going to get them all on grade level, and you're going to make all these test scores look beautiful, and you're going to make all the discipline data look beautiful, right? And those experiences of seeing firsthand the political nature of the education system, to see how numbers are gamed and statistics are played around with, and how people, the actual people involved, the human beings, the students and the teachers and the parents, were just really of no consequence. It was about the business. It was about the data. Wasn't about any of us.
And my understanding is that one of the ways that your progression kind of goes as you're a teacher is that if you're a good teacher, then you get to get out of these failing schools. Is that right? Like any teachers that do actually have some sort of modicum of success, do they end up staying there, or do they get moved around to a better school as a reward?
Yeah, you're speaking to a trend that definitely has been around a long time, where teachers that are having some success, it's like you pay your dues at the tough school, so now you move on to the higher performing school. So yeah, that
which
I
really
saw
just almost seems the opposite.
Right, yeah, and that's I should say that the federal consent order was sort of taking shape there as I was teaching at Johnson. Those hearings were going on and things of that nature, so that's where you started to see the federal government coming in and asking, like, does this make sense? The harder the school, the less experienced the staff. That doesn't seem very equitable.
Right.
And yeah, I saw that because there were quite a few people I was working with who were from Teach for America. Now, I had political beef with Teach for America as an institution, and I wasn't shy about sharing that with folks. But they were all, well-meaning people. They were all good-hearted folks who I think were there to do the best they could. But, if you've got like a communications degree from some private school up north, and now you're coming down here to teach a high school science class.
Wow.
Or something, and it was situations like that where you could see the writing on the wall that it probably wasn't going to work. And the turnover was extreme. Even, at both schools that I was at, there was high turnover. I'd come from a school that had a very veteran staff, highly acclaimed teachers who were leaving left and right. They were either retiring early or they were bolting to the, other districts, and they were going to finish out their career somewhere else. And then, at Johnson, it was a ton of brand new folks, people on emergency certificates, people who just graduated, people from TFA. But then you did have some seasoned teachers who had been there a while, and you just had nothing but respect for those folks who made it, right? Because they were there dealing with a different administration nearly every year, dealing with losing students to gun violence every year, losing students to incarceration every year, and just pushing that boulder uphill year after year after year. So those were the real OGs that you had to just respect, that they could come to work every day and keep on keeping on under those circumstances.
Right. And so at what point, how quickly was it that you turned over to being staff for the AEA?
So that spring of my year teaching at Johnson, the job came open. Like I said, I served as a delegate, a building rep, and was going to all the meetings. I was very involved. I was very outspoken. There weren't many people who were outspoken, particularly non-tenured people who were outspoken. The Wardensky administration had made it very clear that you were not to express any form of dissent, and those who did often found themselves with consequences. So, folks encouraged me to apply to the position. I thought there was no way in hell that I would have a chance because I was still so young and still pretty new at everything with education. But I applied just for the experience, right? I thought, what the heck? It's worth putting my name in there to see what happens. And one thing led to another. In truth, because I was young and new, that meant that I hadn't made many enemies just quite yet, which is frankly the reason I got the position over someone else. And so AEA had no idea what they were getting. They didn't really know. They just thought I was this young up-and-coming whippersnapper who would have a lot of energy and would be a golden boy for them. They had no idea the extent to which I had radical politics, or my conception of organizing, that I was someone who was really and truly committed to building a labor movement in Alabama and in the South. And so it was very quick in my tenure with AEA that those contradictions started to come into play, because it was very clear, as you alluded to earlier, they don't call themselves a union. They are very clear that they don't want to be a union. They are a professional organization, a professional association. They have no inclinations to associate themselves with the rest of the labor movement. And so for me, that was there was just that tension pretty much right off the bat because of that. Because I did see myself as someone who was trying to be a part of growing a labor movement in the South and in this state, and connecting the struggles of workers inside of our public schools to, the struggles of workers everywhere in our economy. I thought that was important. And I thought that it was important that we actually, fight back. As I mentioned earlier, we've been getting our ass kicked as educators for the last several years in a row, and I was ready to do something about it. I was very naive in thinking that the staff position would have been the right move for me. But, I was 25 years old,
Right.
and it was an opportunity that I felt I couldn't pass up. But in the back of my head, I already knew that it wasn't going to work. I knew it wasn't going to work.
If you had it to do over again, do you think that you would, you could go back and tell yourself, give yourself any advice? Do you think that you would have stayed on as a teacher, or do you think that you would have moved from education altogether?
I don't know. And I do think about that a lot. Honestly, I think about that a lot, and I still don't know if I could go back and talk to past me. What would I say? I miss the classroom. I miss it. Because I felt like I could be pretty good at it. I had my moments, and like I mentioned, those moments with the kids when you were making a difference. I miss that, and I miss it now. I missed it after I left it. I didn't miss a lot of the bullshit that came with it. I didn't miss the 2-hour faculty meetings and the nonstop emails from central office and all that stuff. I didn't miss it all, but I miss working with the kids. I miss designing lessons. Would I do it all over again? I don't know. The thing that I wouldn't have the experiences I have now Had I not taken that route, I met so many people, and in my own ways, I think I did do some good work. And so I'm not sure that I would, undo it. But I do miss leaving I miss the classroom, and I think that I knew that there was a real risk in what I was doing by leaving the classroom to go work for AEA as a staffer, for various reasons, just the political nature of the job, but also because I knew deep down who I was not what they were about.
Right.
And I thought maybe I could cram a square peg into a round hole kind of thing, but it was never going to work.
And that, ended up coming to a head, and you were let go by the AEA. And I don't know how much you want to get into that, but, in multiple ways it has, that the difficulties of having taken that position has you're still feeling that to a certain extent today, because for one, you don't have the AEA job anymore. They let you go because of your differences with them, but also in your opinion, it's because of your affiliation with the AEA. You've not been able to get another classroom job, and how many was it that you applied for and you didn't even get a call back?
Yeah, it was quite a few. I mean, I'm not naive. It's Alabama, and I'm an outspoken, fairly high-profile labor militant with left-wing politics. What school superintendent or HR director in this current environment is going to be eager to hire someone like me? I get it. I get it. So yeah, I guess, but what you're getting at is like, it's kind of, when leaving the classroom when I did, it was sort of a point of no return because of what I left for and what I've done since. That's okay. I have to make peace with that. And that is what it is. In terms of the situation with AEA, I was there for over 5 years. I saved some people's jobs. I won hundreds of thousands of dollars for my members and put it back in their pockets. I used every tool in my toolbox to fight for them. I stayed on the media, and that's the thing. I hate being on camera. I don't like being on the microphone. And I know that's strange, because here I am doing this, but I have never been that person. I'm a very private person. Even this interview right now is a little uncomfortable for me to talk about myself and get personal like that. I'll talk union, I'll talk your ear off. I'll talk politics and talk your ear off. But I don't like to be in the limelight. But in a situation like I was in, I had no choice but to kind of be in the limelight. And so I fought very hard to build a coalition to unseat a very destructive superintendent, and we had some success there. And I fought very hard to undo some of that damage. Had some success there.
Well, and I mean, some of the success that, or some of the success that you had as an AEA rep, can be seen. I think with anybody that knows anybody in the education community in Huntsville will have, heard good things about you. And right now we've got in the Facebook chat, Gail Carter said, how much they appreciated you working for the AEA, and you occasionally some of our videos will take off when you talk about education, and there's a whole lot of, you'll see a whole lot of comments like, oh, I miss Adam so much, and all this. And so I think pretty clearly you made a big impact during your time at AEA.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that from Gail and from others, and I try to do the right thing. I know I made a lot of mistakes. There's no training manual for how do you fight the machine, right? How do you fight the machine, and build something, from pretty poor conditions, with minimal support. And so I know I made mistakes. I know there are things I would do differently, if I had it over again. But at the end of the day, I tried to be able to sleep at night being on the right side of history, and siding with those who needed help. I've always been a person for the underdog, and so that's what I tried to do. During my time with AEA, I was very involved with the staff union. That gave me a whole nother layer of experience that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I got to be a delegate for the National Staff Organization. I got to attend trainings with the National Staff Organization. I'm very thankful for my staff union. And they fought for me. They did. They saw it as an injustice. They knew some of the background there. They knew some of the personal and political nature of the situation. And they had my back 100%. It didn't work out, but you don't always win them.
Mm-hmm.
And with the job I was doing, I was used to that, right? I fought a lot of fights knowing we weren't going to win. Sometimes you just do it because it's the right thing to do, even if you know you're going to lose.
Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't very long. It was after you were fired from the AEA that we approached you about the show, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was not too long after that. You and I had already met each other through politics and organizing. Because I guess I should say during this whole time, I was mixed up in all sorts of different politics and community organizing efforts. And, I appreciate my comrades at Tennessee Valley Progressive Alliance and other organizations. So, yeah, you and I had crossed paths. David and I had crossed paths in different things. So we already had some background there. And we had gone to that labor notes training a couple years previously. Right, so I guess you started thinking, well, who's the union guys around here who would be willing to talk on the microphone? There's not a whole lot.
Right.
You probably had a pretty short list. So, yeah, y'all came to me and expressed an interest in me participating in this project. And I don't remember how much I told you about this, but at the time, I was very grateful because I needed something to give me some purpose, some juice to get re-energized. But the thing is, this project is something that I had always had in the back of my mind. Well before we knew each other, well before I'd met David, I felt like there was just such a deficit in this state when it comes to working class media, when it comes to labor media, when it comes to just journalism, period. But certainly anything presenting a more alternative viewpoint, something that that really is of the people and for the people and by the people, just such a deficit with that. And so I had always thought in my back of my head, we should really have some different alternative independent media in this state. Someone really needs to work on that. So yeah, I was thrilled, when you guys started this project, and was a fan. And I remember you guys had some great guests right out the gate, and so yeah, I was very grateful when y'all approached me.
And so unfortunately, there's definitely I derive, a certain amount of juice and purpose from the show. Unfortunately, it's to this point hasn't been able to provide you juice in the form of physical sustenance, right? And so,
That's okay. That's okay.
And so what you've been doing in the meantime is you've been working as a union stagehand here in Huntsville.
That's right. Yeah, I've had a lot of irons in the fire. Just like a lot of folks, after you experience disruption in your career, right, you're right back at square one. You're a gig worker, and you take the gigs you can get. And so yeah, I been doing all kinds of different things just to try to make ends meet, including substitute teaching. That's been also another very low paying position,
Right.
but it's been kind of cool to go back in the classroom and see things from that perspective. And it only reaffirmed my ideas that superintendents and principals should be required to substitute every month as part of their contract. And we need to talk about that one day. But yeah, I got mixed up with IATSE 900 here in Huntsville. And that was a totally different experience for me because I had been in the education sector and working in politics and advocacy. So to go to a blue collar job, was a change of pace for me. And to be at a trade union with this big team environment, man, I have loved it. It's the best job I've ever had because you show up, everybody helps each other out. You have a mission to do. Somebody's going to help you understand that mission. And if you get lost, someone's going to help you get right back on track. And you just help your brothers and sisters out to finish the job safely. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the night, you have just built something fantastic that people are going to enjoy, right? And there's just something really cool about that. So I have loved it. I mentioned earlier, music has always been on in my life. And so now to kind of dip my toes in that industry a little bit, that's been fun. And I'm very grateful for my sisters and brothers in IATSE 900. They kind of welcomed me with open arms and, admitted me into the union. And I've been very transparent with them that I'm much better writing grievances and writing contracts than I am with a wrench and a hammer,
Yeah.
You want me to review the contract? You want me to write a press release? I gotcha. Carpentry, not my go-to skill set, but they've been great to work with me. And yeah, I've been
Well, and just like with being a teacher, you said you were a building rep. What, by the end of your first year?
well, I was actually just elected to a board of trustees.
Yeah. Yes,
for
I mean jumping right into the business of the union, the organization, and
I just wanted them to know that I'm happy to help however I can contribute. And so that's been cool to kind of go back to square one, instead of being like the guy. I'm just one of the guys, and I'm just here to help and contribute my talents and skills such that I have them in a way that's going to benefit the whole union. So that's been cool. I have been involved a little bit and been enjoying that and looking forward to strengthening 900 for the years ahead.
Something that I have always wanted for this project is to reach out to people. The reason that David and I didn't make this a podcast, the reason that we did it on the radio, and on a conservative radio station, no less, where Sean Hannity started, is because something I've always wanted for this project is to be a project that reaches people beyond our clique, beyond our people, beyond people that already agree with us on everything. And that's something that is that I think is important for a media project that's interested in political education like we are, but I think it's also very in keeping with the identity of the show as a union show, because a very important part of being a good union organizer is to work with the contradictions of the workforce, which are many, and deal with anti-union and conservative attitudes, which often go hand in hand, sometimes reactionary politics, and sometimes even unhelpful left-wing radical politics. And so, I'm interested in how did you deal with those ideological contradictions as a building rep and as a Uniserv director for AEA, working with teachers who, and this is something that so many people are, I think, purposely obtuse about. Teachers often reflect the population. And so if you have a mostly conservative population, your teachers are going to be mostly conservative, right? That's just the name of the game. And so, how did you, as a, not closeted, right, about your left-wing politics, how was it that you navigated these sometimes dicey waters within your union, among your coworkers, and how do you see that experience as it relates to your work on this project?
Yeah, I think it wasn't always something that I necessarily had to, think through all that much. It's just that I think if you center things around what's real for working people, what's really about their lives, what's impacting their lives, I think you can have success with organizing and with just building bridges with folks. We had success with that coalition against Wardensky, where you had white Tea Party crowd in the same room with the NAACP. You had North Huntsville and South Huntsville, in some cases, on the same side. And, day after day, in terms of trying to represent teachers and public school employees, you have to navigate that as you do in any working environment. The teacher's politics more or less reflects the general population. And so I think I didn't see it as my job to try to convince the workers I represented to think like me. For me, it was, how can I support them to support themselves and to fight for themselves, and to win dignity on the job. And I think if we do that the right way and we go about it the right way, a lot of times they'll on their own maybe reject some of those reactionary politics or some of those reactionary attitudes, because I think the very experience of being in shared struggle with someone, particularly someone different from you, is an experience that can change people. And so I think it was something that it wasn't always like super planned out and deliberate. It's just, you kind of have to, if you take it seriously, like if you really want to just help people, you got to help them. And that may mean that they believe some shit that's really backwards, right? That like sometimes that, offends you.
Mm-hmm.
They may believe some stuff that is just, bad for them. Not just, something you disagree with, but something that's actually bad for them. But you got to help them if you take it seriously. And so I think folks generally saw that, even if, some of the most loyal teachers I had, some of the teachers who like had my back, when things went really south with AEA, a lot of them were white Republican teachers, oddly enough. And I think a lot of folks might be confused by that, because here I am, this young radical, but I think they knew that I cared about them and about the system and about the kids, and I just wanted to do the right thing and help them. And I think folks, by and large, can get that, and I think folks, by and large, can figure out, at least on a day-to-day experience, who's really with them and who's not. Now, it gets a lot more confusing when we start talking about who do we vote for every 4 years and, that kind of thing. But just when you show up to work, I think most people have a pretty good sense of who's with them and who's not. And it doesn't take long when you actually engage in struggle to really figure that out.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think, and sometimes folks from outside the South, I think, don't appreciate how difficult it can be to organize down here. Yeah, and to have some politics that are quite different from everybody that you're talking with. So much so that you don't even have common context sometimes. Like you don't even have common definitions of words sometimes. So how do you've got to find a way to build relationships with people and work towards common progress and find those things where you can work together, because you know what, that person may not have liked what I thought about immigration, but they liked that I had their back when their boss was treating them like crap, right? They knew they didn't deserve to be treated that way, and I knew it, and I let them know I had their back, right? And so I think that makes a difference, and I think folks who've done organizing in the workplace just have a sense for it that maybe, the more politically minded people just have never really gotten into. Because it's just different, it's just different when you have a responsibility to fight for that worker, whether it's a worker you like or dislike, and if you have a bigger picture in mind, though, that it's about all of the workers, not that one person. Yeah, that one person might be a jackass, but that one person's case represents everybody else's case, everybody else's struggle. And if we win that one, that's important for everybody else. I think it's just that's a mindset that a lot of times maybe the political type people don't have, that those of us who've been in labor can just appreciate on a deep level. And,
for me, that kind of attitude is really something that, and I don't know, I've, and maybe I ought to try to center that even more, because I've gotten a couple of comments lately that maybe some folks felt like I was being condescending to, to people who believe, to generally people who believe differently than me. But the thing that I've always wanted the show to put out is that it is not that if we have different politics, I don't want to dehumanize you. I want to attack the people that are powerful and that are at the top of these hierarchies. But, I've read a lot of the, more liberal writers, and I have felt like I'm on the end of some of this snobbery. And so I've always wanted to come from a place of maybe we have different politics, maybe we don't, but if you're a worker, we're on the same team, and I always want to make sure that comes through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think that is huge for me. I believe that I'm not better than anybody else, and nobody else is better than me. Mm-hmm. And that really is like pretty core to who I am. Not just politics, but just in general. And I think that is part of it. So I agree with you. I want the same for this project. I never want to come across as condescending to folks, because I certainly never want to come across like we're punching down or anything like that. It's about power. And if you are a working class person, you're my brother, you're my sister, and I don't care. Even if you do believe some stuff that pisses me off, right? Even if you are confused in my mind or wrong in my mind, that doesn't mean I want any less for you. Doesn't mean I want you to suffer. I think sometimes in American politics, it seems like that's what a lot of this is about. Like,
right.
Okay, there's my folks, and then there's those folks, and I want those folks to hurt.
Owning the libs is so central to, the reactionary media outfit.
It is,
right?
yeah. It's like even
that's the whole thing of their politics.
I mean, even so much so that it's like even if we're not doing anything positive for me and my people, I at least can know that something bad's happening to someone else, right? And find some gratification through that. And that's just, I've never understood that, and it just doesn't make sense to me at all. I would never want less for someone else, because they disagreed with me. Now that's different if they pose a threat to other folks, because we do have, I mean, I want to be very clear about it. We've got some pretty dangerous fascists out here in this country who mean real harm to people of color, to minorities of all kinds, and certainly to people with radical politics such as ours. So it's a little different, but yeah, I've never understood the politics of like owning your enemy and that kind of thing. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and to be, on the show, and in my view, purposely so, I'm purposely not terribly explicit about any, long-term political project or labels, and I think really I was talking to actually David Griscom yesterday or the day before that, and I told him that I don't feel like I'm a very sophisticated political thinker, and he told me not to sell myself short, but I really don't think I am. I don't feel like a very sophisticated political thinker. I think that my politics are very, very gut level in a lot of ways, and that I have a very strong sense of like what's fair, and I want what's fair for people. And it seems to me that what would be fair for people is for, power to be democratized in a broad way, in the workforce and the economy and in the government. But but anyway, we're not terribly explicit, but just for the edification, it might be interesting for folks to know more of like explicitly what your political outlook is. And David asked in the chat if you feel like you're more of a reformist or a revolutionary, and why, and what path do you see and strive for being of whichever one of those you feel like you are.
That's an interesting question. I guess I would say I'm a revolutionary in the sense that I think only a revolutionary transformation of this world is going to save us. That means an end to capitalism. And I don't know what comes next necessarily. I don't think any of us do. But what I do know is very clearly the status quo is broken. And we need something different. And we can do something different. I believe that deep down. And, sometimes I'm thinking of a few folks in particular in my life who tell me that I'm very cynical or that I'm very negative, pessimistic. Because obviously my outlook on mainstream politics, right? I am more of a radical. And so I am quite critical of liberals, conservatives, the media, all of it, right? I get that. And so sometimes people assume that means that I just must be this like super pessimistic person, but deep down, I really do believe that we can put an end to poverty, and we can put an end to war, that we can put an end to bigotry, that exploitation and oppression do not have to continue, that we can do something different, that we could guarantee that every person really does have a chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I really do believe that. I think the only way we can do that, though, is through an organized working class that is powerful enough to unleash this transformation. And I don't think any of us can really say what exactly that would look like. And I guess we'll know it when we see it. Maybe. I don't know. And, I'm going to go with you as it's the same kind of thing. I don't particularly think of myself as a very sophisticated political thinker either. As much as I can appreciate theory, and I try to stay well read on theory, I think I'm much more like you. It's just, hey, I don't think I'm better than anybody, and nobody's better than me, and I want what's right for working people, not the bosses. And that's, I would say, my politics. In terms of the path, um, I'm someone who believes in a revolutionary transformation, but has had to operate in these kind of reformist circles, and in some cases, even less than reformist, I would say. So I think that's just sort of the more of a practical thing that you were getting at earlier in terms of like organizing workers with different political persuasions, right? It's not that I've never abandoned that hope that we really can do something better. But I'm also not going to say, well, it's not everything, so why try, right? If we can make some improvements in the meantime, then I'm all about that. And so I'm willing to fight for reforms along the way if it does improve the lives of working people, and in particular if it changes the balance of power and can shift things to where we can build more victories upon that reform. But that's kind of how I feel. So, we do what we got to do to survive in the system that we're in, and try to make things better as we go along. But I don't think we should ever lose sight that the system itself is broken, and we can do better. As human beings, I really do think we can do better. I just think it's a matter of whether or not we as people can do it quick enough before things really get out of hand, I think.
All right. Well, Adam, do you think there's anything else folks ought to know about you?
Like I said earlier, I don't feel super comfortable doing this kind of thing. And I am a very private person. I'll probably be thinking all night about what I just said today, whether that was really okay. So I do appreciate the support that I've received from folks on this show. I appreciate the support from rank and file educators I've received from North Alabama, from fellow advocates and labor organizers across the country. I've had a lot of people cheer me on, and I appreciate that more than y'all know. And so I just want to contribute however I can in a way that helps grow labor in Alabama and across the South, because I think the South is unique, and the South is where the fight has to be strongest for so many reasons. And so I just want to contribute in my own little way. I have fought the power and often lost in that process, but I'm still here, and I'm going to keep on doing it.
Adam Keller, co-host of the Valley Labor Report, union member, activist, organizer. Thanks for talking to us today.
Appreciate it.